Wilmington Morning Star, June 6, 1944. French coast hit by heavy bombers. London, Tuesday, June 5, AP. Allied aerial battering of Hitler's European holdings roared past the 90-hour mark today. Without giving the German coastal defenders a chance to come up for air, RAF heavyweights set out early last night in great strength to take up where United States daylight raiders left off. Axis radios reported nuisance raiders, their usual term for mosquito bombers over the Reich. This suggested that the main targets for the night were in France or the lowlands. The American bombers, numbering up to 750, in flying their 8th daylight mission in 4 days to break all records for heavy bombers, dropped 2,200 tons of bombs on the coastal strip from Calais to Boulogne and boosted the total dumped on the invasion coast since Friday to 15,000 tons. A U.S. Strategic Air Forces communique announced that 6 American bombers and 2 fighters were missing from the operation. Apparently, they were down by flak, since no enemy aircraft was encountered. For bombers previously reported missing in Sunday's operations have returned safely to their bases, the communique said. Flying Fortress and Liberators, shepherded by 500 fighters, dumped 2,200 tons of bombs on the Nazi frontline invasion defenses in the area from Calais to Boulogne as the mighty Allied aerial onslaught thundered into its 18th consecutive day. Details and losses were not announced immediately.
Detroit Times, June 6, 1944. General Eisenhower announces invasion. Allies land on French coast. Supreme HQ, Allied Expeditionary Forces, somewhere in Britain, Tuesday, June 6 UP. General Eisenhower's Supreme Allied Expeditionary Headquarters announced today that Allied armies were landing on the northern coast of France. Announcement of the greatest military operation in the history of the world, one which is intended to crush Germany and her satellites and to liberate the oppressed millions of Europe, was made in Communique No. 1 of Allied Headquarters shortly after 9:30 a.m. 3:30 a.m. Detroit, about 3 hours after German broadcasting stations had said that the invasion was underway. The Germans put the invasion front opposite the South England coast, centered around the Seine River estuary and the Seine Bay, about 80 miles from the British side across the English Channel, and along a stretch of about 5 miles of the French coast. The Germans said that airborne troops were playing a big part in the operation. At 10:10 a.m., German broadcasts reported fighting between German and Allied troops 10 miles inland from the coast of Normandy. DNB, the German news agency, also said that Allied troops had been reinforced by sea and air at the mouth of the Seine at dawn. Headquarters announced that General Sir Bernard L. Montgomery, the tough hero of the Allied victory in Africa, was commanding the Army Group, which was carrying out the assault on the western side of Hitler's fortress Europe, an assault which, it has been promised, will be followed by blows from east and south. American, Canadian, and British troops are in Montgomery's striking force. It was announced. General Eisenhower's historic communique No. 1 said, under the command of General Eisenhower, Allied naval forces, supported by strong air forces, began landing Allied armies this morning on the northern coast of France. This was followed immediately by an order of the day to the assault groups, telling them that they were embarking on a great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The order of the day, issued by Eisenhower personally, said to the troops whose young lives are dedicated to the greatest military attack of all time, the hopes and prayers of liberty-loving peoples everywhere march with you. You will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940 to 1941. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans a great defeat in open battle. Man-to-man, our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to Vic. Continued on page 2, call for. Communique No. 1. London, June 6th, United Press. Text of Communique No. 1 of Allied Supreme Expeditionary Force Headquarters. under the command of General Eisenhower, Allied naval forces, supported by strong air forces, began landing Allied armies this morning on the northern coast of France. French told to quit coast. London, June 6th, INS. The British Broadcasting Code today broadcast a warning from spokesman for the Supreme Allied Commander advising the French people to leave the entire coastline of France. The spokesman warned the French to leave the coastline to a depth of about 22 miles inland, to keep off the roads, avoid crowds, and remain in the countryside and woods. The BBC warned that French coastal areas contain targets which will be intensively bombed.
Imperial Valley Press, June 6, 1944. Invading Allies land on French soil, opening thrust hurdles west wall, big airplane armada opens way. 11,000 bombers and fighters precede land troops who sweep beaches as they tumble from 4,000 vessels in first contingent. Berlin admits battles being fought back on coastal barrier. By Virgil Pinkley, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Forces, London, June 6, UP, Allied Armies, transported by a mighty armada of more than 4,000 ships and protected by 11,000 planes, stormed northern France Tuesday, and in mid-afternoon the Berlin radio admitted that the invaders had succeeded in sending landing barges into two estuaries that are behind the Atlantic Wall. An hour after first of the American, British, and Canadian invasion forces hit the beaches, the Allies had won complete mastery of the skies over the landing area. Correspondents who flew over the invasion line saw troops splashing ashore against little resistance. By midway, airborne landings behind the German lines were reported successful, Nazi shore batteries had been largely silenced, and amphibious forces still were swarming ashore at numerous points. Berlin admits Allied advance. The German DNB news agency said this afternoon that Allied landing barges had pushed into the estuaries of the Orne and Wear rivers in the coastal stretch between Cherbourg and Le Havre in the rear of the Atlantic Wall, the vaunted defense line that Hitler hoped would keep invaders off the soil of Germany. Nazi broadcasters also acknowledged that Allied tanks had cut several kilometers inland between the towns of Caen and Isigny, and admitted Allied penetrations ranging up to 10 miles. The Germans reported heavy fighting in the area of Caen, 9.5 miles inland and 115 miles from Paris on a direct railroad line. General Dwight D. Eisenhower's Supreme Headquarters announced that casualties had been light among airborne troops spearheading the invasion with landings behind the German lines. Many airborne missions reported remarkably little anti-aircraft fire, the Nazi batteries apparently having been crippled by the intense air assault before the invasion. One large group of troop carriers returned to base without a single flak hole. Nazi broadcasters said the Allies had won footholds on several islands off the coast of France. Earlier they reported landings in the Channel Islands west of the Norman Peninsula. Continued on page 6, column 1. Invasion weather. London, June 6, UP. The weather over the Straits of Dover on Invasion Day. The sun broke out after a daybreak shower. Broken clouds swept up from the northwest. The wind blew fairly hard during the night but lost some of its strength after dawn. A moderate sea was running. Visibility was good and improving. Temperature was around the 60s. The barometer had fallen slightly in the last 12 hours. High tides at Dover and Calais today, 12:50 a.m. and 12:48 p.m. How this land acted when D-Day arrived. San Francisco, June 6, UP. The gateway city for the Pacific battlefront took the news of the European invasion calmly. The city's thousands of servicemen apparently were not excited. Announcements in late motion picture theaters were greeted with sober applause. At the Great Kaiser Richmond, CAL, shipyards, yard officials said they had not broadcast the news to the workers and did not contemplate making any announcement which would interfere with ship production. Portland, Oregon, June 6, UP. Mayor Earl Riley threw the master switch sounding Portland's air raid alarm system at 12:33 a.m. PWT, immediately following General Eisenhower's official announcement that Allied forces were assaulting Fortress Europe from land, sea, and air. Although police sirens joined in proclaiming the long-awaited news, few church officials could be reached. The Trinity Episcopal Church threw open its doors during the early morning, admitting more than 150 people of all races and creeds, including many in uniform. Columbus, June 6, UP. Special church services were held throughout Columbus as residents took the news of the invasion calmly but grimly, and Gov. John W. Bricker said it marked the beginning of the end of the forces of evil and destruction. San Diego, June 6, UP. This military town took the news of the European invasion without so much as batting an eye, despite elaborate plans which had been laid. The plans called for blowing of whistles, the opening of all churches, and pausing for a minute of prayer, but when the invasion flash continued on page 6. They're on their way to Berlin. Full text order of day that started invasion. Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, London, June 6, UP. The text of General Eisenhower's order of the day: soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving peoples everywhere march with you. You will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940-41. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeat in open battle man-to-man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking. Returning Pilots Tell of March. By Robert Richards, Fighter Base, England, June 6, UP. First Allied fighter pilots who returned from flying over the beachheads reported that Allied infantrymen were scrambling up the shores of Western Europe at 7 a.m. 1 a.m. EWT, Tuesday, apparently without heavy opposition in the early stages. The pilots, who crisscrossed the invasion coast giving cover to the ground forces, said they could see a huge fleet or warship standing off the coast pasting enemy posit, continued on page 6, column 6. I've never seen so many boats in all my life, said Maj. John L. Locke, 27, San Antonio, Tex, a squadron leader. Flying over harbor, I counted a great number of cruisers, destroyers, corvettes, and hundreds of other types of craft. The constant flashes of their guns indicated the beach was getting a heavy pounding. Col. William H. Curry, 29, Raleigh, North Carolina, Group Commander, said he saw the troops wading onto marshy shoreline around 7 a.m. European time. From his altitude, Curry could not see any signs of heavy opposition. Warships were bombarding the beach ahead of the troops, he said. Behind the warships pounding the coast, Locke said, came a never, continued on page 6. This picture tells how Yanks, Canadians, and British gained their foothold on beaches at the chosen invasion points. It was taken in the last hours of practice for the big push. Tokyo declares Axis Partner Welcomes Day, by United Press. The Japanese end of the beleaguered Axis whistled tremulously in the dark on Invasion Tuesday. The landing operations on the European continent must be highly welcome to the Germans, said Nobuhiko Nshiba, former secretary of the Japanese embassy in Berlin, in a statement broadcast by Tokyo Radio. There is every possibility that the enemy will be fatally caught in a death trap elaborately laid by the German High Command. Ushiba took the view that the Nazis had been eagerly awaiting D-Day as the signal for a counteroffensive against the Allies. The much-heralded anti-Axis invasion of the European continent will most certainly mean the advent of a decisive turning point in the European military situation. It will provide Germany with a much-needed springboard for turning to a victorious general offensive against the enemy. Ushiba said he could well imagine the jubilation in the German High Command on receipt of the news of the invasion. Ushiba said that he knew from first-hand observation that the German defense line from Dunkirk to Cherbourg, through Dieppe and Le Havre are the most formidable that have been constructed on the Western Front. All of these formidable fortresses continued on page 6, column 8. Germans waited 2 hours for assault flashes, by United Press. The Germans broke the news of the Allied invasion to their own people at 11:40 a.m. German time, 5:40 a.m. EWT, Tuesday, more than 2 hours after the Allied announcement and long after German news agencies had been broadcasting the news to other countries. A special announcement on the German home radio heard by the United Press listening post at Barnet, England, said, "The long-expected attack by the British and Americans against the northern French coast started last night." Several minutes after midnight, the entry, with simultaneous heavy bombing attacks, dropped strong airborne formations in the area of the Seine estuary. Russ expected to start on second invasion, London, June 6, UP. Military observers said Tuesday that a general Russian offensive coordinated with the Anglo-American attack from the west may be launched within the next 48 hours and almost certainly will begin before the weekend. The United Press informant said a crushing two-way attack from the east and west was laid down by the American, British, and Russian leaders at the Tehran conference last year.
Detroit Times, June 7, 1944. Second invasion on Nazis report. Allied Supreme HQ, London, June 7 INS. Coincident with Nazi claims that Allied amphibious troops had tried a new invasion of France across the narrow Straits of Dover, German long-range guns in the Pas-de-Calais area unleashed a barrage on Dover and its vicinity today. Approximately 40 rounds of Nazi shells fell into the Dover-Folkestone area, while German broadcasts were reporting an Allied landing attempt across the 21-mile channel. The German-controlled Paris radio reported today that a huge Allied armada comprising some 6,000 vessels, including heavy cruisers as escort and a swarm of landing vessels of all types, is now cruising off the Cherbourg Peninsula. The naval guns of this fleet are engaged in artillery duels with the German shore batteries, Paris said. Editor's note: Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Force had no comment to make on the German claims of a landing attempt in the Calais area. German batteries between Boulogne and Calais, which in a matter of moments were subjected to Allied air bombardment, appeared to be in operation, using salvos of 6, 4, and 2 shells in succession. Nazi firing lasts hour and a half. The Nazi firing lasted for more than an hour and a half. Allied aircraft were in constant action over the channel. New formations were seen returning to the area of Cape Green as early in the afternoon. 5 great waves of aerial troop carriers, including a Skytteran 50 miles long, poured reinforcements into the Allied beachheads in Normandy during the night, and the invasion forces were reported pushing inland today against increasingly fierce German resistance, the UP reported. Headquarters of General Eisenhower, announcing that progress was made throughout yesterday in fulfillment of the master plan of liberating Europe, said that heavy fighting was underway in some areas. Nazis report major battle with the mammoth Allied assault against Adolf Hitler's Europe some 36 hours underway. This was the general picture presented. The German High Command claimed that Allied invasion units had come into contact with Nazi tactical reserves, precipitating a major encounter in the vicinity of Bayeux, midway between Le Havre and Cherbourg, some 20 miles northwest of Cannes. For the second day in succession, German naval opposition to Allied landings was negligible, although Nazi air force activity increased. Some German coastal artillery defenses are still in operation despite Allied air and sea attack. Field Marshal von Rundstedt, Supreme Commander of German anti-invasion forces throughout Europe, in his first communiqué said that Allied forces had made contact with German reserves. Weather remains unfavorable. Weather over the Straits of Dover and the English Channel continued generally unfavorable, but some improvement was noted, with high cloud banks affording aerial cover. In official communiqué number 3 disclosing that airborne operations were resumed successfully last night, the Commander-in-Chief of Europe's liberation stressed the important role of American Rangers and British commandos, the absence of German naval opposition, and said, Allied forces continued landing on the northern coast of, continued on next page. Yanks fight across dead. London, June 7 UP. The first assault troops who stormed the French beaches were mowed down by German crossfire, but succeeding waves climbed over their bodies until a foothold was established, an eyewitness who returned from the beachhead reported today. Bert Brandt, 28, an Acme News photographer, spent a half hour on the beach yesterday and several hours more cruising within gunshot of the landing scene. It was hotter than hell over there, Brandt said. I was at Anzio, but Anzio was nothing like this. He said the Germans laid down intensive fire on the beaches with well-placed machine guns. American casualties were spotty, heavy on some beaches and light on others. On one beach, Brandt reported, the German machine gunners waited until the landing craft lowered their ramps and then poured deadly fire into the barges. The opposition met by the first wave delayed the landing of demolition parties scheduled to follow with heavy equipment. Allies landing in France. U.S. Signal Corps photo distributed by International News Sound Photo. The first picture of Allied troops storming the French invasion coast from landing craft and assault vehicles as larger vessels stand guard offshore. Detroit Flyer describes battle scene. Fighter U.S. bomber base, England, June 7 UP. We could see tanks everywhere, and I could see soldiers squatting atop some of them, as if they were smoking. Thus, an American Thunderbolt pilot described one apparently captured French coastal town near the Seine estuary early today. The pilot, Second Lieutenant Leif Johansson, Cambridge, Massachusetts, said the town appeared to have been battered severely, both from the air and by shells from an Allied battleship lying just off the estuary mouth. Chateaus burn. First Lieutenant Edward F. Main, 2349 Lawrence, Detroit, reported seeing several isolated chateaus flaming furiously as if the Germans had fired them to keep them from falling into Allied hands. It is amazing how many burning buildings there were in almost every area we covered, he said. All pilots reported an extraordinary contrast between the smoke and flame-shrouded beachhead areas and the peaceful countryside a few miles inland, where cows were grazing placidly and Frenchmen rode bicycles along dirt roads. Gliders line fields. It's really a hell of a war, one pilot said, when you dive down to strafe a moving vehicle and it turns out only to be a Frenchman peacefully riding to town in a bread truck. Earlier, pilots returning from patrols reported that 100 or more Allied gliders line the fields in Normandy, although the airborne troops seem to have disappeared into the surrounding countryside. Fighting Fifth is coming. 93,000 invasion vehicles. Washington, June 7 UP. Foreign Economic Administrator Crowley reports that 3,000 tanks and 90,000 tank destroyers, trucks, and jeeps were sent to Allied forces in the first 3 months of 1944. Fighting Fifth is coming. Glider troops first in France. London, June 7 UP. A glider group commanded by Lieutenant Col John M. Donaldson of Birmingham, Alabama, actually launched the invasion of Western Europe, the Allied Expeditionary Air Force announced today. The first glider to land on enemy-held territory was the Fighting Falcon, piloted by Lieutenant Colonel Mike C. Murphy, veteran stunt flyer from Lafayette, Indiana. Donaldson's group were the leaders of more than 900 troop transports and gliders which took off shortly before midnight from more than a score of bases in England. All planes in his group returned safely. Her D-Day joke calls out Army and Navy. Police and naval intelligence officers searched today for the woman who last night emptied virtually every downtown movie theater of men in uniform and chased them to the foot of Woodward with a fake emergency call. Early in the evening, when the theaters were crowded, a woman who identified herself as Lieutenant Baker of the WAC pleaded with theater managers to flash a message on the screen stating that an emergency existed and calling on all Army, Navy, and Marine Corps personnel to leave the theaters and hurry to a mobilization point at the foot of Woodward. Police reported that several hundred men in uniform crowded to theater box offices where admission was refunded and hurried to the alleged mobilization point only to find that the appeal had been a D-Day joke. Communiqué number 3 tells Allies' gains. Allied Supreme HQ, London, June 7, UP. Text of Communiqué number 3. Allied forces continued landings on the northern coast of France throughout yesterday, and satisfactory progress is being made. Rangers and commandos formed part of the assaulting forces. No further attempt at interference with our seaborne landings was made by enemy naval forces. Those coastal batteries still in action are being bombarded by Allied warships. Bombers attack. At twilight yesterday, and for the fourth time during the day, our heavy bombers attacked railways, communications, and bridges in general in the battle area. There was increased air opposition, and 26 enemy aircraft which attempted to interfere were shot down. One Allied bomber and 17 fighters failed to return from this operation. Other enemy air activity included an attack on our beach forces. This proved abortive, and 4 of a formation of 12 Junkers 88s were destroyed. Low-level attacks. In addition to attacks on defended positions and other objectives in immediate support of land operations, rail centers, bridges, military buildings, and communications at Abancourt, Circus-Amiens, and Vire were attacked repeatedly throughout yesterday by our medium and light bombers. Allied fighter bombers and fighters flew low to attack enemy units and motor truck columns. From dawn to dusk, a vast Allied fighter force maintained vigil over our shipping and over the assault area. This air cover again was completely successful. Airborne operations were resumed successfully last night. Coastal aircraft attacked German naval units in the Bay of Biscay. A strong force of heavy night bombers attacked bridges, roads, and rail communications behind the invasion area, including the junction at Châteaudun, and 13 heavy bombers are missing. Light bombers also were out over the same type of targets, and night intruders destroyed 12 enemy aircraft without loss. 1262 Donate D-Day blood. 447 pints of blood were donated at the Red Cross Blood Center, 450 W Fort, on D-Day. Yesterday, it was reported today, and total donations throughout the city were 1,262 pints. In addition, 750 persons called the center yesterday to make appointments for future donations. The best day at the center was March 1st, when 449 pints of blood were given. Of donors yesterday, 117 have relatives in the armed forces. The blood center telephone number is Cherry 1200. Poor Adolphe. Suicide scene. Maybe hanging if caught. Washington, June 7th INS. Senator Lister Hildy of Alabama predicted today that Hitler will commit suicide after the Allies crush his legions. But if we can catch him, he and the other Nazi gangsters must hang, said Hill. That would be the ignominious way to dispose of them. If they escape to neutral countries, we must bring pressure to cause them to be delivered up. Nazi leaders who must be destroyed, Hill said, include Goering, Goebbels, and Himmler.
Rocky Shimpo, June 7, 1944. Progress of war watched. It is not yet known, of course, whether any Japanese Americans are among the troops scheduled for the succeeding waves of invasion forces attacking in France. There have been, so far as is known here, no information about Nisei units stationed in England. Of course, this does not preclude their presence on British Isles. To date, it appears that all or most of the Japanese American troopers in combat have been sent to fight against the Nazis in the Italian campaign now nearing climax. As the Anglo-American forces approach, it was Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson who steadily backed the loyal Japanese Americans' right to enter the Army, and it was he and the War Department officials who conceived plans for the Japanese American combat units. Following a line of thought frequently expressed by responsible officials in the nation's capital, it may safely be presumed that many Niseis will see action in Europe before long. Except for the specialized tasks, mainly those of interpretive and translation work for which Niseis are being trained and used in the South Pacific Campaign, authorities frequently have intimated that the Japanese-American combat soldiers may not be used in that particular theater of war. This, however, remains to be seen. Assault forces strikes France. First units of Allied assault troops began landing on the French coast, across the English Channel and the British Isles at 1:25 a.m. Rocky Mountain wartime, 6 a.m. London time this morning. This marked the D-Day. As the mass American, British, and Canadian troops crossed the Channel and British U.S. air forces pummeled the landing beaches, the nervously awaiting Nazi forces made their expected and furious counterattacks, according to reports issued from the Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Force this morning. As of dawn today, Tuesday, particulars regarding the progress of the long-awaited invasion remain to be disclosed. Eisenhower, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, commander of the Allied forces, who planned the invasion strategy, issued the order of the day in London today to his troops. His opening remarks were, "You are about to embark on a great crusade. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessings of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking."